Thanks everybody for coming. And yeah, we're excited to have a little talk about the show here and explore some ideas and take questions from everybody as well. So,
and given the size of the audience, it seems quite possible, like if there's something that you really want to ask in the midst of us talking about any given subject, you could probably just pipe up to keep it more organic.
yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, and so Eric, we've known each other for a number of years. We've been in each other's studios, and I've been watching your work evolve. And so I was really delighted when you invited me to have this conversation with you. And I was thinking about, where would a good place to start be? And I think actually most of you are quite familiar with Erick's work, but just so that we have the lay of the land, I'm wondering if you might walk us through how you actually make these, the stages that are involved, how you start,
Yeah,
what
sure.
the average studio day looks like for you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, these are all oil on canvas, and the way they start is with drawing, and I do sketches, and then I do small color studies, and usually on graph paper, and so they're very schematic to begin with, and that's evolved. I mean, what I can say just in starting is that I was more of a gestural painter going back, and I've gradually become less and less gestural and more working within this geometric framework. But I like to think between that, inside that framework, there's still a hint or an echo of a gesture and or a sense of movement of the paint. And but things have gotten more geometric, and I just was feeling more reductive at one point. I was feeling more like I needed to just let go of these elements that didn't seem to be what I was growing more interested in. So I kind of let that go and tighten things up. But I think the big moment was when I started taping things off and creating these tape areas.
So how does that play out in your studio? How do you even get to the shapes that you're using? Like, how do you start?
I've been using these irregular polygons. I'm just kind of fascinated with the specificness of them, but also the kind of mutability and the imperfection of them.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to repeating patterns that can tessellate perfectly into like hexagons or equilateral triangles. And, I mean, those are used a lot in mosaics and patterns that they perfectly reproduce. And my forms they're not interested in that. They do fit together, but they don't fit together in a way that is infinitely reproducible. And that's important to that irregularity, because then that allows for some asymmetry and some unpredictability. So all those things come into play. And when I draw them out, I do many drawings. So I do a lot of, then there's a lot of erasing, and I make adjustments, and there's
And these are on smaller
like
surfaces.
graph paper. And then I'll get some ideas I like, and then I'll put them on either small pieces of paper that I can paint on, or small panels. And then sometimes I'll do color studies if I have, if there's time and space to do that, I'll do color studies.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, then I'll scale them up onto these larger canvases. And so sometimes I have an idea of the color schemes, but I definitely have the composition that I want to work on. And then sometimes I do make adjustments, as I go.
Mm-hmm. And what does that look like? like? How do you go about adjusting something that's maybe not so satisfying, that's unfolding on this kind of surface where everything is so pristine?
Yeah, well, I don't do that much of that, but occasionally, there'll be something that just is not working out, and it's because sometimes there's many layers, and sometimes I wipe off, and I'll keep going and try to get the color right, but sometimes there's just too much of a buildup, so then I will sand down a shape, and then I'll put another coat of ground over it, and just, start fresh from there. So that sometimes happens. Sometimes the shape, or the way the shapes go together isn't working, so then I'll make slight adjustments to the shapes. And if you look closely, sometimes you can see, some of that evidence.
Like the purple polygon in the upper
Like
left-hand corner?
Like that. Like this one took a lot of adjustments, and it was, sometimes you try out ideas, and then they might work on paper, but then they don't translate well to a larger scale.
So a process question related to that is, do you favor having them just work out, or would you prefer them to need little adjustments? Like, do you have a preferred state?
I'm okay with some adjustments, but like massive adjustments, means that I probably need to go back to the drawing board. I mean, the color, I can make, sort of infinite adjustments to. That's more what I'm interested in. I mean, if the composition is strong and it's working, it's working with the colors and the relationships are all there, then I like to focus on the colors. So.
Yeah. Well, something I've noticed, like, within this body of work, and really all your work, is that there's such a sense of balance and equilibrium. Like, no matter how different in size all the polygons are, this is in many shows that I've seen, or the color discrepancies or the negative space, there's still like such a sense of that you're heading towards balance, despite all the toying with making it not a perfect balance. Like you were saying, it doesn't snap to a grid at all.
Right, yeah, so, the balance is, it's my nature in a certain way, and so I try to interrupt that, as much as I can, and I think that's that tension between, ultimate balance can be almost like stasis, So I think when you talk about balance, to me it's a compound term where it implies imbalance, and that if you think of a pendulum swinging, right, and it's kind of there's an oscillation that you could say that balance point's in the middle, right, like it's balanced between moving on one side or the other, but there's a lot of movement, that's so balance. It's a tricky term.
Well, it's almost like with your work, it's balance precarity, because you're programming in all these precarious arrangements, but then figuring out how to make them coordinate with one another in a way that creates a very, almost like, serene viewing experience, except it isn't structured that way at all.
Yeah. How so?
Well, because, there are all these sharp angled interstitial areas that play with one another, and things are jostling for attention, and there's quite a lot of disruption happening. And
well, it's, that's, I just tend that way, I don't know why.
So even if balance and equilibrium, they're not, would you say that they're the subject of your work, or are they the structure of your work?
The structure, I don't think in terms of balance in that sense. Like, I think it's just, I just want something that's satisfying as a starting point. And then the color is where the relationships start to happen in a more specific way.
Mhm.
And, you know, I really grapple with that, with how to make it all work, you know, but I don't know that I'm not consciously aware of balance, you know, in that sense, like but I keep working until it feels right, I keep working till it's like, okay, there's, you know, these colors are talking to each other, there is, you know, a kind of, relationship that I enjoy, seeing.
Well, I was curious because each shade has such freshness. So if you keep working on them, how do you do that and have that freshness?
Well, you know, just in terms of the color, I tend not to use black or gray.
So it's layering.
Yeah. So you know, I'm very aware of keeping the pigments, you know, pretty clean, pretty fresh. You know, I mean, that's this group. This group. I was starting this work, and I thought, boy, I want to just use. And I had done some work over the summer up at for Furnace Gallery in Connecticut, and that work was really clean and bright and fresh, and I just was feeling like I wanted that palette to keep going, and it was a little bit, you know, it was optimistic, it had an optimistic feeling to it, and, yeah.
I was just gonna ask a really simple question. How do you get your lines straight?
You know, the lines are, I use a guide.
So the guide, what's the guide?
The guide is it's usually a piece of wood, like a long strip, and I'll clamp it down. And whichever way the paint's going, I mean, we can talk about how I make them. So it's, you know, I'll use, you know, a guide like that. I'll brush the paint down in a section. Each section is taped off. I only work on one section at a time. And then I'll use the squeegee, which is, it could just be a piece of foam core or a piece of insulation, you know, and I'll just kind of drag it across. And then that process kind of creates these striations.
So the squeegee is a regular, so it's not, doesn't have grooves in it or
You
anything?
know, well, I make them, you know.
You make them?
Yeah,
Right.
and I mean, it's just a kind of a flat surface that, I mean, it's not like a printmaker squeegee, not like an actual squeegee, but it's a tool, you know, that you know, and sometimes I'll you know, it'll be akin to a grading tool, so
That's what I was
it'll be
thinking.
like a comb.
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
But not always, you know, and then, but I can, you know, so I have a bunch of them, I've, you know, spent a while doing that, so, you know, but that's how I get them, and then, and it's unpredictable, so I never know exactly what it's gonna look like or how it's gonna come out. So I'll do it, sometimes it's great the first time, other times it's, you know, maybe multiple goes, you know, yeah.
And this translucency, do you use, what's the medium you use to get, like, it looks like almost watered down, but of course it's not water, like, what
Yeah.
is, that's the impression, I actually first thought it was acrylic when I saw it, so.
I do thin it out with mineral spirits, but I
Yeah.
also use a product called Liquid by Windsor.
Okay.
And I was using Calculated at some point, but it dries up the brushes so quickly, you know, that Liquid's a little bit more forgiving that way. And then that creates a certain viscosity of the paint, and you know, it has to be, you know, I adjust that all the time, the pigment, the mineral spirits, and the medium, to get the paint to flow in certain ways.
So, with the polygons of the drawing, is that any color in that, or that's just determining the polygons in a composition?
When I start, you mean?
Yeah,
It's just a pencil drawing.
pencils.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's really just the, you know, the forms themselves.
Yes. So talk about the color stage. When do you plan that color stage, or?
You know, sometimes I do. If I have enough time, I would plan it all out.
Yeah.
But But like for this show, I didn't do any color studies.
So it's more reaction, oh, I have a pink one here, I wanna do,
Yeah, I mean, the most basic kind of, it's not really a rule, but it's just a kind of way that I work is that I tend to work warm colors against cool colors. Green is an exception, you know, because it can be a warm green or a cool green, but
yeah.
so, you know, I'm creating oppositions between warm and cool colors. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. And so that can, and, you know, I tend to not want the same color like right next to each other. But I've done, like this painting here is blues and greens, you know, mostly. And so that's getting a little bit closer to, you know, a closer range of colors, I guess.
You can really tell this is a painting.
I know.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
Which is very
the reason why we're asking these questions, because I don't think it's very.
Well, and I kept asking him about his process, but
Yeah.
he kept booting it up to like the reason why he does things and not how he was doing it. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're getting nailed on this.
In looking at the passages, a lot of it seems at times like they kind of go between almost like low-tech imagery that has been, there's like a striation, and then also there are moments where they transform into almost like light quality.
Yeah,
And I was kind of wanting to get your sense of,
yeah.
are you thinking about any of those things, or?
Yeah, well, there's, in this group, it's a mix of just pigment on the white ground.
Mhm.
And if it's thinned out enough, then you know, you're getting some reflection through the pigment and it's bouncing back and it looks transparent, so it's a little bit more like a window.
Mhm.
And then other shapes are more, I've used, you know, white titanium zinc to help create a gradient and a blend, and that's a little bit, it's, you know, it's referencing a deeper space, but
Mhm.
it's also kind of more up on the surface.
Would that be like the kind of mossy green bottom right-hand corner of that
Yes,
one?
exactly.
Uh-huh.
That's exactly right, and that's kind of, you know, really hovering close to the picture plane. And, whereas, you know, like that green in the middle there on the left is, I think that, no, I don't remember, but the one on, the blue on top is more recessional for sure, because it's got, you know, it's more like sky.
To me, the painting seems like one of the most unusual in the exhibition, in that it seems like in the other works, the one next to it, the shapes seem to be contained within the format, whereas this one seems like those passages can go drift beyond the surface.
Exactly, yeah. This is, for this show and for the last show I did, I started using these kind of floating polygons.
Mm.
So that was a new idea. It was called, that last show was called Avenues, and it's kind of referencing, you know, this movement between the shapes and making that explicit, like that negative space was another way for your eye to move through the work.
Mm.
And but in this case, I just, you know, I broke the rule that I was trying to stick with, you know, and I just was like, even though there's like tiny little passages here, like this is, you know, you gotta get real close to see it, but so I really broke the rule in spirit, but not entirely, you know. And so, you know, I'm feeling like those are two ways to go forward, you know. But it does, like that one in the behind you is like that too. Those go to the corner with edges. You know, it definitely creates a different space.
Mm.
This one has very, almost perfect balance of both.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed the interstitial spaces, whether they're like mortar or negative space in past work, you allow it to color up in some areas. You know, in what, the last show or last two shows?
The negative space?
The negative space.
Yeah.
And here there's not a bit of that happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I got some advice, someone that I really, honored their point of view, they just said, just don't do it.
Is that Sarah who said that? Can I say?
Yeah.
I haven't sort of worked out all the ways to make you talk about it, because I know how taciturn, elusive you can be.
He's a Libra.
But those two, both by the installation
Mm-hmm.
and by the information and all the constituent parts and the treatment within it, are a world unto themselves from each of these and others in past shows. And they stand out as a different idea about what it means to have color inside the shape and how one shape gets to the, as Sarah said, the interstitial negatives, and sort of the amount of room you give that's then recreated, the tension and flatness through how the color is drawn back from the final edges, right? So it's a whole different vocabulary of how to sort of experiment with shapes. And they're also more, they're centered differently in terms of the action between them. These are layered next door, these are almost reflected in shapes, and how they sort of jump from one strata to the other. So with all that sort of thrown at you, would you share a little of your thinking? Are these the most recent, are these older?
No, these were part of the group, and
He's a part of the group.
Well, they're not.
what's that?
Well, they're not, is it?
Well, I don't know, they're totally in the realm, but I did them towards the end, and, so, sometimes it's hard to predict, they just come out a certain way, and sometimes it's the scale of the work, and sometimes it's what you did before, and, to your point, the color choices can be, they happen in the moment, they're intuitive, I'm not even sure something's gonna work, so I'm not like writing down, this is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and, so if it does work, if it does feel like it's really working, sometimes I don't absolutely remember like how, I know the pigment usually, but to make another one is impossible.
No, but I mean like the lines, they're very discrete and clear as edges meeting the two.
Yeah.
Whereas the whites in these are all sort of an intentional jumble of, do they lock in?
Yeah.
Are they off geometry?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But then the air you get, or you allude to in these, you get by pulling the color more to the center and leaving the white as if there are two sets of
Yeah. Well, I think the one behind you is related.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the one on this opposite wall over there, like those, I would say, and then this one too, I think those are all floating shapes. None of them come to the edges. So I think, and what I hear us talking about is like there's a real difference between when the shapes go to the edge versus when they're floating. But I can't say anything like totally special about those because they just came out of the whole group. I wasn't thinking anything different, for those. Although, well, I could say, the palette is a little bit more muted.
The thing about those is that in each of the shapes, there's the color is denser in the middle.
Right.
That is unique to those.
Right. So the gradient, I agree. So maybe there's an optical illusion of that compression of the form or the color that's fading out to
The white.
infinity or whatever. Yeah, within the form. Yeah, I'll buy that.
With these, and also the one directly behind Russell, and also with the others, the negative space, I think of it almost like cartilage between forms, but it recalls like Dan Walsh and Eisenstein, who's in the room. There's this quality of how forms are formed by the space around them that I think Warren and Dan both use, as well as cutting off the corners. I don't see a single corner that's filled with a shape here.
Yeah.
What's that about?
You know, I was thinking, at one point, I was thinking, because I had done a body of work that had, it was all geometry with really sharp edges.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and it worked for that work. It was, you know, central axis and, you know, kind of, you know, very structural,
Mm-hmm.
and symmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
And, for the last show I had here. And then I just, you know, I was starting to think about, you know, rounded corners, bull noses, things in design and architecture that just create a more human, friendly environment, and then or a sense of touching it, let's
Mhm.
say. And I really pondered that, you know, like what is that about, all that, you know? And then as opposed to like, I don't know, like a chair by Robert Wilson that's just like really sharp edges and sort of rectilinear and all that. And so I was, and even though I don't do curves, I was thinking like, okay, well I can, if you make enough straight lines, you know, as a corner,
Mm-hmm.
it'll start to read as
Mm-hmm.
a curve or a softening of that sharp
Mm-hmm.
point. You know, I think in Maureen's and Dan's work, it's more integral to their compositions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's it's curving, like Warren's shapes are more curving and
Yeah, there's not a single curve in her work.
yeah, no curves. Yeah, maybe someday.
That's cool.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's true. Yeah.
I've got another question. Does the shape determine color, or color determine how you go about creating the shape?
Does the color determine the shape in some
Yeah.
way?
Or like, so, I mean, I'm
It's
imagining you mask an area out to be painted, and then you lay a color down. Does that color change, or is the color set based on the size of the shape and what's adjacent to the shape?
Yeah, I mean, I have all kinds of notions like that, you know, when I'm working. So, you know, like especially a big shape, right? Because that's a bigger commitment. So, you know, I'll think about that a lot. But you know, what I found is like thinking in your mind about it is not the same as you know, when you actually get it down and you actually see it. And then also when I move the paint, depending on what's happening with, you know, when I drag it and I create the striations, like there's a lot of moving parts to it in that sense. So sometimes what I think might be, you know, a nice, you know, choice, you know, ends up just being a layer that's gonna, like I'll keep going over it until I get what I want. And then if it doesn't work out like I've said, I'll sand it down and start over. But it's also responding to what's happening around it. So I'm, you know, very involved with the relationships between the colors and, you know, really responding to what's already there. But the first color you put down is, you know, unto itself, you know, it's so as you go, it sort of gets, like sometimes I'll get to like the last shape, I've got all the other colors down, and like the last shape has to get, you know, make a choice on, you know, and that, you know, that can be a little, you know, nerve-wracking to make a choice, you know, and, but ultimately it's, you know, you do it, you see how it works, and, there's a lot of adjustments that goes into the work, so, and that's, I mean, I kind of love doing that, so, yeah.
So you said like you work on one area and it's done. So you take, like I'm specifically interested in the yellow purple, right?
Yeah.
So now if you mix it up, it will turn out more brown or gray, depending on, so you have to actually first work with yellow, leave it, right?
Right.
Dry it and then go with purple over it.
Well, not necessarily,
No?
because, I mean, you know, that's one way to do it, but you can also, you can paint in, like initially you can use, I mean, like some of these, so take that one, that purple yellow shape, I mean, I could have started with like a very light purple, and laid that down. And then I could even, pull the paint, kind of get the beginnings of some striations going, and then I could go in with that pale yellow and just lay that down with a brush. And, kind of blend it, there's some blending going on, with the brush. And then go with the squeegee.
So now, if it's drying, right, then you have to jump to completely different area and work in another corner because you can't take nearby.
Yeah, you can't work on two contiguous shapes.
So do you work on multiple pieces so that some can dry?
Yeah, you can do, like, depending on, like a big one like that, you've actually got room, there's room enough to work on, 4 or 5 of them at a time, and then let them dry. And the way my paint dries, it dries overnight, so I can, if I'm painting it during the day, the next morning I can go back in and do something else.
So do you work on one shape until you feel that that is a complete thing, and then peel the tape and then that's it? Or do you
No, what I'll
write
do is,
retape?
I'll do all the shapes with a base color, and then I'll make adjustments from there. And as I go, I'll have more, sometimes you do something and it's just like, okay, that's done, it may not have to be adjusted, but almost everything does.
Right, like this one, you can see there's an off register to taping twice,
Yeah.
which is kind of nice, it gives a slight blurry edge.
Totally, yeah.
Is it okay if I ask a question that's not about process?
Oh, of course.
I just wondered the title of the show, like Continuum, do you see that all is relating to each other?
Well, I was thinking of it in different ways, but continuum in the sense of, they're all related to each other, but also that the shapes relate to each other, and then the colors relate to each other, and that it's a continuation of work that I had been doing, and and there's a sense of a continuation of movement that's implied throughout the works. So I like that. Just a single word, that again was it had a little optimism like built into it, as opposed to terminus. Dark hole.
So, talk about the movement. You use the term movement.
Yeah.
What do you refer to?
Well, it's, I think about movement in different ways, but it's a really important concept for me in the sense of, I sort of came to geometric painting late. I didn't really like come up doing that. I was more of a gestural painter, so that sense of movement was really important. So when I did sort of move towards geometry, I was thinking, how can I keep some of that? How about keep my arm in it, keep my body in it, keep that, and then the movement also. There's a lot of, I don't want to, say anything negative, but there's a lot of abstract, like hard edge painting. It's flat, opaque color. That's very resolved. And no sense of movement. You can move your eye around it, but there's no implicit movement. And so I wanted to have the geometry, but I wanted the tension of that against the movement of the paint and the sense, it's a little bit of a human touch, a human resonance, if you will.
And it seems like it's like the opportunity for you to have almost, relate to the polygons almost like living beings within your paintings, because they all are so different from one another. They touch each other in very different ways. Like some don't want to touch its neighbor, and others cling to their neighbors, and so they kind of jostle around the picture plane. It creates a ton of movement. And so I wonder, in the studio, do you get into that aspect and kind of push it in your own mental environment, the kind of anthropomorphizing of these fragments?
Yeah, I don't, I'm not sure. What would you say is the most anthropomorphic moment that you see?
Well, I think it's how all the members of each individual community relate to one another.
So like
Because
body
it's not in
language.
just one spot.
Like a family or a group or
Yeah, some kind of group of people that all know one another.
a gang.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I try to avoid, obvious, sometimes like a couple of eyes and nose and mouth, but I try to avoid that, I mean,
Gotcha, Eric.
but sometimes it can happen, I'm not against it if it sort of happens organically.
Right, well, clearly, I was just wondering, how much, that just plays like a background narrative in your head, the relational space between things.
Yeah,
Coming out of a more formal vocabulary and filtering into other kinds of narratives.
yeah, I mean, I think movement, I think, asymmetry, I think, a certain, kind of serious play of the forms and a sense of possibility in how it can be read by the viewer. I think the reference to my hand and my body is there for sure. I think that's enough, put it that way, to have all that physicality. So, yeah.
Talking about movement, I'm interested why only in this painting you chose to do diagonal. Everything is like horizontal and vertical. It's just one painting that has, and you have not repeated. There, oh, I can't see them.
Yeah, the last show I did
Yeah.
had all diagonals,
Okay.
So who knows, I might go back to it, but I didn't, I guess I was also, when, I think a lot about verticality and horizontality, and, horizontality implies, landscape and horizon lines and, sky and all that, and vertical is, traditionally a physical kind of sensation of being in a human body, let's say, or, up and down. And, so this one is the outlier, if you will, because it does have some diagonals. But there's no, this one just called out for it, I guess, because I had that triangle, and I thought, okay, I decided to go diagonal with that, and then that blue form was going all the way across, and it didn't work, so then I kind of carved out that green area on the left, and that was a diagonal too, so it felt like the two diagonals going together made more sense. Too many diagonals starts to get a little overly dynamic, I guess. And I've already got diagonals in the polygons, like they're already kind of built into the polygons, so right now I don't feel the need for it that much, but who knows, going forward. That makes sense? Yeah.
I know that you have an interest in polygonal masonry from a lot of different cultures, but you've been to Peru. You're also interested in textiles. I was wondering if you could expand on that in relation to these.
Yeah, well, we made a great trip down to Peru, I don't know, 25 years ago, maybe something like that. We went through the Sacred Valley and, flew to Cusco and then ended up in Machu Picchu. And I was really knocked out by the stonework. And the way the stones fit together, the way, just the care that they're carved with, and there's different like historical, segments of the stonework. There's I forget what they call it, like a classical period where it was just this incredible, fine, stonework that was reserved for the most special temples. And, like in Cusco, there's the foundation of an Inca temple that the Spaniards kind of destroyed, and then they built a church on top of that. streets where the walls are kind of this incredible technique. So, and the way they're fit together is beautiful because it's kind of an irregularity to it. There's an irregularity, but a integrity to the way it's done. It's just awe-inspiring. And so I thought about that, and I worked for Isamu Noguchi for 13 years, and of course he was influenced by that, and he's, you know, a genius, and so I was, you know, in that environment for a long time. So I'm not a sculptor, you know, I'm very happy painting, but, you know, it definitely influenced me. And then as far as textiles go, you know, painting is very close to textile, you know, with the canvas and the weave and all that, and the way it occurred to me that I was layering the paint in a way that, I mean, now it's all kind of linear in a sense, but there was a point where I was kind of doing cross-hatching, and it was, you know, more explicit as a reference. But I love proving textiles for many reasons, you know, but one is that they have this, you know, there's a handmade quality, but there's also this, you know, the vegetable dyes, the color, the palette, sometimes when they run out of a thread or a color, they'll just substitute another one, and it will be analogous or it'll be completely different. They also use modules where you would have a pattern, and they'll just alternate the threads, you know, with these modules, and it's just this great, you know, abstract.
Do you know the Shikigo textiles in Peru?
I don't know, I'm not familiar with that.
Because the early ones, the ones we make now are kind of touristy, but the early ones are very subtle, and just the play between the shape and the line is so, I don't know, it feels really good.
No, you know, and the museum, when we were there, you know, we went to some of the museums in Lima, you know, they were kind of dusty and neglected, but they had these incredible treasures.
Actually, the Museum of Native Americans or American Indians near the World Trade Center, that has a Shikigo textile, or it's actually a ceramic, but it's the same kind of fabric.
Same patterns.
Yeah.
And those, and a lot of times they were burial shawls or shrouds that only existed because they were up at this incredibly high altitude. It was so cold, there was no humidity. They were preserved as a result of that. So.
Well, what strikes me about this whole conversation that we're having here is that first, it's river painters, and second, you are so in your process that you can describe it in every detail. You know, so it's total involvement of, you know, micro differences and things of color nuances. So it's very deep looking in a very specific way.
Yeah, very important. Well, I imagine everyone has their own, you know, that focus in the work that is really meaningful to them, right?
Right, but it's, yeah, but with yours, you the variables are very controlled, you know. Like it's a shape between, or it's a edge, or, you know, they're narrowed down.
Yeah, I'd like to push that as far as I can. That tension between the geometry, and then, you know, it's sort of, I think of it as being calming and energizing. You know, that's those two kind of polarities that are always, you know, kind of in tension with each other.
Well, it's so interesting that you're not using a typical grid layout whatsoever. Back to the whole Peruvian thing, there's that story, I don't know, probably some of you may or may not know this, but in Peru, when the Spanish came, they had the artisans pull down the temples and recarve the polygonic block architecture into you know, like squares into grid forms to make the Christian churches. And
What happened then?
the earthquakes came and leveled them because grids suck for like earthquake. They're not earthquake proof at all. So this is actually all these fragments together as polygons, not conforming to a grid, is kind of earthquake proof.
Yeah, well, that's,
Maybe that's part of the optimism.
Yeah.
yeah, well, I also, I think about stained glass, and I think of mosaics, and I think of, things that might have fit together at one point, like sometimes there's, we talk about secret geometry and, golden section and all that, but we've talked about that I'm not drawn to that because I feel like that's a kind of perfect, it's an attempt to display perfection of a certain kind, and I don't think that's that interesting. It's more interesting to be a little before that or a little after that, where things are not quite resolved.
Well, in that way, there's a lot of syncopation in these. It's a little like visual music.
Think about music a lot, yeah. And I think about color is sound, in a way, like, and I think of compound sounds, like a guitar, being strummed with 6 different strings that creates a chord that is a compound sound that's very pleasing to the ear. So if I'm combining colors, many times I'm thinking about that, that kind of compounded sound that you might get from a guitar, an electric guitar, something that's, has some distortion built into it, or some fuzziness, and yet it's a very distinct thing. That's very exciting. But then in terms of the improvisation, there's also that idea of not knowing what's going to happen next. If I put down a color, if I do some layering, whatever, there's one change can affect the whole work. So that's important too. Like, I don't really want to know beforehand what's going to happen. So that's really important. Keep it fresh.
So, given that these have a sound component conceptually for you, do you listen to things when you're in the studio?
Yeah, I do. I listen to, I tend to listen to instrumental kind of music. I find lyrics, almost like a little bit like drone music. I mean that in the best possible sense, not like drone, it's going to put you to sleep,
Right.
Kind of stuff. But
Pattern-based music.
Pattern-based, and yeah, there's in the internet, there's so many stations now, you can just dial up, anything you want to hear. So there's bands now that are, like, I grew up in the 70s, so, there were a few bands that got under my skin, like Led Zeppelin, and Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath, and they had their day, but now there's all these younger musicians who make music like that, but instrumental mostly. And so it's, I don't know, it's just great to pay to for me, because it's not like something I've heard, and you can get on an internet station that just plays for hours and hours, And you can like it or not like it or whatever. But it's a nice, for me, it's like a nice, and I'll listen to other things too, but I seem to like that. It's calming, in a weird way. So, does anyone get a musical vibe from the work at all?
Most of your things are 2 colors, right? You use your stripes, and I can see 3 most, right? And I think that's like a chord or that's very musical.
Yeah, once in a while there'll be more, but sometimes they get recessed a little bit, usually 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think, you know, color that's very, your color is very specific in relationships, so, you know, they have a precision to them, and in that sense, it's chordal, right? It's
Right.
like music, it's like a way it goes.
Yeah, I'm not musical, but but I think about that. I think
Yeah.
about, you know, how music goes together, like all the sounds go together, and how that might work in terms of color.
Well, and you have dissonance and harmony.
Right. Very important. Yeah.
It seems like in an increasingly fragmentary and dark world that your work is actually getting more user-friendly.
Yeah, maybe that's what I need, you know,
Yeah.
to myself.
Would you ever think of, like, when you have a stripe going this way, would you ever think of going across so that's like a checker?
I did that for a while, you
Yeah.
know, and it was hard to control, you
Yeah.
know,
I would think so.
and but I, and
These
that's,
are directional.
yeah,
Yeah.
and also like there's a lot of glitches in the work in the past, you know, where it'd be like, you know, it might happen accidentally, but then it might also happen because you know, the squeegee's catching on something, or, you know, there's just something on the surface, like, when I saw Jack Whitten's show at MoMA last year, those Greek alphabet paintings were really, moving to me. I'd seen them before, but it was always great to see them, and he was putting things underneath the canvas and then kind of dragging. He had this big squeegee he called it Developer, you know, it was this monstrous thing, like 10 feet wide or something. He had a bunch of them, and he would, you know, kind of use it like a rake, you know, across the canvas that was on the floor. So I've never done that. I've never embedded something underneath, but I could, you know, it could be an interesting thing to play with and work with. But the other thing about his work is just that I found there was an emotionality to that work that, you know, it's kind of austere. It's usually just black and white. It's very abstract, but just that tension of knowing he's making that work physically, and it's not totally controllable. He's not totally sure what it's going to do. You know, it's just very engaging. Like you can feel his presence in the work, the making of the work.
It's free.
Yeah. So that, you know, I'd like to capture some of that same feeling, I guess, the way I work. So I can imagine bigger things, you know, bigger shapes, bigger canvases, you know, scaling up. You know.
How does risk figure into your work? Like, how much risk are you willing to take and then leave the evidence of?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess that part of me that wants, you know, that really is moving towards equilibrium that's hard. It's a hard one because I'm always, you know, fighting against that. You know, but I mean, there's different kinds of risks. There's like, you know, put everything up at 101, you know, on your life savings, you know, and all that. But there's also like smaller risks, like where you might mess up something, you know, that's retrievable, or not, you know. But I don't know. I don't feel like I'm swinging for the fences that way, you know, where like, you know, I just destroyed that whole thing last night. I've got to start over, you know. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I take risks, but in a more measured way, I guess. Just the way I work.
Did you have a question? No. Okay.
Well, I do have one question, actually. What is there a source, or are there specific sources to the color? Or does the color come from color itself?
You know, I'm influenced by things. You know, I'll see, like we were out in Sausalito, and we went to Heath Ceramics. It's a famous ceramics place, you know, like so they make ceramics for the whole world. And they had these collections of you know, really beautiful ceramic colors, you know, color charts,
Yeah.
and you can get the samples. And I was really interested in the way they grouped them together. You know, it would be like sort of a harmonious grouping, you know, that somebody somewhere had concocted. And they had a bunch of them. They had these, you know, and I mean, that's not a great example, but it's like, I just came across it and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. I'll take that home and I'll look at it and I'll think about it. And you know, and sometimes you could see, what was it? I was looking at, you know, the color scheme for the, you know, the Matrix movie series, you know, this trilogy.
Okay.
And they, you know, they had this great kind of steampunk kind of aesthetic, and they would, you know, use these green colors when they were inside the matrix, and then when they were outside the matrix, it would be just kind of normal color. So I was thinking about that way of it's like cinematic grading of color that influences the feel of the movie.
Right.
And sometimes I'll see movies like that, and I'll think about that. I'll think about, oh, is that, you know? But also there's, you know, great palettes that artists use throughout history. I mean, you know, so you know, Unicorn's got a great, you know, incredible color sense, you know, and he was influenced by Matisse, you know, and then
Yeah, sure.
you got someone like Stanley Whitney who.
So you're looking at stuff all the time, like,
Yeah,
and some people will very well color, the color is really coming out of color.
Yeah.
They're more inside of that, and I think other people are just, they're absorbing things from the world and their experience.
Yeah, well, no, and I mean, I'm influenced by urban color quite a bit.
Yeah, you have a photo project you do.
I did street photography, like kind of abstract street photography for years, and I took a photo every day for like 2 years straight that I posted, and a lot of those were these kind of flattish facades, or you know, just places in the city where light and color and paint and rust and, you know, like all that kind of unplanned compositions. It was between the composition and the found color, you know, and that was inspiring. So I get color from all of them. Yeah. But I think my color sense is my own, and that's, you know, I always come back to that. Like I'm always gonna just I'm gonna work with those colors that and they can shift a little bit, but I'm still gonna put them together in my own way. So,
Your color sense is tied with light, so you can't extricate it.
right.
But they're very luminous.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I do have one last question. You know, you're a very hands-on painter, and I love that even though you didn't talk about it at the beginning when I asked you, everybody has been besieging you with questions about how you, yes, actually make these things, because they are so made. But how do you wish to see these paintings handling the viewer?
Well, the short answer is that you know, I mean, they're meant to be finished by the viewer. You know, in other words, you come to it with your own eyes, your own, you know, the way your eyes see color, and then also the way you put together. I mean, in a way, like the shapes are pieces of the painting, right? And you can, I mean, I think there's an element of assembling it in your mind's eye, and as opposed to like a top-down kind of like, oh, this is the way you need to look at this. So I totally believe in that. I totally believe that that, I mean, I make them for myself, and then, but I don't wanna be didactic, or, I don't wanna dictate to the viewer, you know, and that's, I think that's one of the things I love about abstraction, is that it has an opening quality that I feel is generous. It's not meant to be, you know, off-putting, or, you know, elitist or anything like that. It's more like, okay, here's, you know, I'm gonna meet you halfway here, you know, and you can assemble it in your mind the way you want to, the way you need to. Assuming, you know, people are colorblind. I mean, then it's the composition, right? So there's always something.
I'm serious, one last question, on 1 to 10, do you think your paintings are slow or fast?
The pace of how I make them?
The viewer proceeds to get into.
Oh, the pace of viewing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I always think that we all do a fast read, you know, initially, and then I mean, I hope, you know, and I would imagine a lot of people hope that, but that you're drawn in a little bit, and then there's maybe a slower read.
I mean, artists are different, and some are slow and some are fast.
Yeah.
Right?
But sometimes you can, I think there's also the distance from the painting, like you're gonna get technical, if you see it from across the room, you see it a certain way, you can't see certain details unless you know, have eagle-eye vision or something, but as you move closer to it, it starts to change. It's a different painting when you're a foot away from it than when you're 20 feet back. And there's some artists where you literally have to get up, you know, within a few inches of it to really see what's
I'm
going on.
talking about the paintings that, you know, it takes like a really long time to understand, and paintings that you can understand very quickly.
I see. Yeah, well, and also, I think time is really important. You know, that like a slower read is, I mean, I spend a lot of time looking at these things, you know, and sometimes I'll see them in the dark, you know, or you know, when it's dusk, you know, and they'll look different. And then, I also think of them in environments too, you know, a gallery is great, but, you know, in a home is great as well, you know, where it's being lived with and surrounded by other things, and, you know, has a life, you know, beyond the gallery. So that's what I hope for. So,
Since everyone asks a lot of questions, it feels a little funny to ask if you have any questions. But I think if there's no more questions, we'll just say it's complete.